And I now request Chairman Strike, Major A. Parmar, Vishishta Seva Medal, to set the ball rolling. Over to General Parmar.
Thank you, Ajay. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Strike webinar on Kargil War and the way forward. The moment you hear the word Kargil, your mind gets charged with the heroic tales of our young officers leading their men from the front on missions then appeared virtually impossible. Yet the impossible was made possible due to sheer guts, determination, valor unparalleled in the history of warfare, and supreme sacrifice of our soldiers in the line of duty. Never in the annals of warfare has any record been found of the officer-men casualty ratio of 1:10. Gentlemen, this is our army that any country will be proud of. Why and how Kargil War happened and how the conflict termination was enforced on the enemy is now a folklore. But what is important is that lessons of Kargil must not be forgotten, allowing the proverbial history to repeat itself and remind us yet again of the gains and losses of the war and the way forward. Please remember, it was a war fought between two nuclear-capable nations, which needed a very delicate balance to be maintained throughout, needing astute leadership at national and international levels. Indian forces had to fight the war under some very stringent and self-imposed constraints, like not crossing the LOC and yet evicting the enemy, occupying very dominating and virtually unassailable heights. Some of the important facets like the jointness of the operation at every level and stage, and the telling effect and destruction caused by use of mass artillery and exemplary junior leadership under extreme conditions were distinct hallmark of the war. Operations in such conditions will always require supreme physical fitness of troops and thus a need for a younger age profile of soldiers, especially for the infantry. Importance of synergized inflow of intelligence using the most advanced technologies will be the crying need in future operations. Today, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers with us to discuss these and some more important issues related with Kargil operations. I, on behalf of STRIVE, welcome our honorable guests for taking the time out to be with us and share their experience and views on today's subject. Team STRIVE remains committed to discuss and deliberate on issues related to national security and national building. I now hand over to General Ajay Chaturvedi to take this webinar forward. Ajay.
Before I invite our first speaker of the day, let me make some useful announcements. I request everyone except the speaker to be put mute by our technical team. The webinar is being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube also. Later, we shall put the transcript of the day's proceedings on our website for those who wish to refer for the future references. There will be a Q&A session after the last speaker completes his address, and therefore, I request you all to put your queries in the chat box with your name and also for whom the question is meant, and I shall refer the question to the concerned. The order of the addresses will be as follows. The first will be the keynote address by Lieutenant General Joshi. Marshal Amit Tiwari. Now, first speaker of the day, Lieutenant General Yogesh Kumar Joshi, Param Vishesh Seva Medal, Uttam Yudh Seva Medal, Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, Veer Chakra, and Sena Medal. The keynote speaker of the day was commissioned in 13 Jammu and Kashmir Rifles in June 1982, which he also commanded during Kargil War. He commanded a brigade, division, and corps in the Ladakh region. He speaks Mandarin, was defense attaché in China. He has also served in various capacities in Military Operations Directorate, including that of Additional Director General, Military Operations during the critical period of surgical strikes against Pakistan in 2016, and no wonder it was such a great success. He has also been the Director General Infantry when semi-automatic rifle 6R was procured. As the Army Commandant in Northern Command, he is credited with spearheading the Indian response to People's Liberation Army of China's attempt to alter the status quo on the line of actual control by force during the summer of 2020. However, without any doubt, his finest hour was when during Kargil War, he commanded 13 Jack rifles in Dras and Mashko Valley. Under his inspiring leadership, the battalion captured 4 strategically important objectives, including point 5143, popularly known as Sagar Hill, and now renamed as Gun Hill in Dras sector, point 4875 in Mashko. The battalion was conferred with the title of the bravest of the brave and was awarded 37 gallantry awards, including 2 Paramveer Chakras, namely Captain Vikram Batra and Sipahi Sanjay Kumar, 8 Veer Chakras, which included his own Veer Chakra, and 14 Sena medals. The general has agreed to speak for 20 minutes to share his perspective on the Kargil War and also the way ahead. May I now request General Joshi to please commence his talk.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction.
General Joshi, sir.
Can you hear me, sir?
You're mute. Sir, you're mute.
We can hear, sir. We can hear, sir. We can hear, sir.
We can't hear.
We can hear.
Yeah, you can be heard.
No,
Hey, go unmute to there. RP, please unmute him. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. A very good morning, gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank Strive for inviting me today to give this keynote address. Well, 5 days have elapsed since we celebrated the grit, the valor, and the indomitable spirit of the Indian soldier on Kargil Vijay Divas on the 26th of July. And today, I am delivering a keynote address on the first televised war of India. The Kargil War did create history on various accounts, but most importantly, it will go down in the annals of history as a saga of unmatched bravery displayed by the armed forces under an overall strategic articulation of restraint. The higher direction of war, once enunciated, it was left to the soldier, the leader, and the units to translate the same into a decisive victory. Before I go into the details of the war fighting, it will be necessary to provide a geostrategic construct to this misadventure of the Pakistan Army. The Lahore Declaration and the confidence-building measures thereafter were an olive branch offered to Pakistan. But General Parvez Musharraf had already set the ball rolling on Operation Badr. He was trying to take a leaf out of the Indian book on Operation Meghdoot, of preemption to capture tactical features with strategic ramifications. The aim of Operation Badr was basically to alter the line of control east of Zojila and cut off the National Highway 1 Alpha, revive terrorism in Kashmir, and internationalize the Kashmir issue. Talking about the terrain obtaining in the area of operations, to a person who has not witnessed the harshness of the weather and the torturous terrain of Kargil, it is quite incomprehensible to imagine the area in which this war was fought. The terrain, gentlemen, in this area is the most hostile imaginable. Movement through these mountains is painfully slow. The area being glaciated at heights up to 18,000 feet, sub-zero temperatures, it takes an average of 10 minutes to cover 100 yards, 5 times longer than on the plains. It is even slower with ration, ammunition, weapons, warm clothing, and communication equipment. The approaches along which we had to assault, running along the mountain ledges, are narrow, and troops have to walk in a single file. If you slip and fall, it's certain death. And if the enemy pins you down with machine gun fire, there is nowhere to run to or take cover, not a blade of grass. The terrain, therefore, clearly favored the defender, and more so when is well dug in. And then there is fatigue. The thin, rarefied atmosphere saps the energy of men. Troops therefore required acclimatization before being inducted into this area. The thin air also takes its toll on the weapons and equipment, whose performance deteriorates at this altitude, which you're all aware. The logistics build-up required before any operation can be launched, therefore restricted the momentum of attack. Gentlemen, no praise is high for the fortitude, patience, and resilience the soldiers showed under such conditions. The ordeal was not only for the soldiers at the front, but for every soldier on the battlefront. There were many unsung heroes supporting him. The challenging task faced by the troops while assaulting the bunkers and sangars built by the adversary was a huge challenge even for the most strong-hearted. And here lies the acme of junior leadership, with young company commanders leading the assault, and the troops followed them through a hail of bullets and through a barrage of artillery shelling, even at the cost of their lives, to capture the objective and accomplish the mission assigned. Looking at the situation prevailing prior to 1999, the deployment along the line of control of 16 and 15 Corps was nearly continuous, and between them, the two corps had approximately 58 Army and BSF battalions deployed along the line of control. However, the areas lying to the east of the Great Himalayan Range, that is the Kaubal Gully and Zojila, being more difficult for carrying out large-scale operations, and also given the threat perception, were held at selective places based on the passes and other known track through high mountains. The operational responsibility for this stretch, along with the AGPL in the north and the LAC with China, was with 3 Infantry Division under 15 Corps, located at that time at Leh. In May 1991, after the Kashmir Valley got engulfed in terrorism, a strategic review was carried out. As the situation was expected to persist, it was decided to induct 28 Infantry Division from Western Ladakh to Kashmir Valley. 3 Infantry Division reverted to its pre-1985 responsibility of looking after both Western as well as the Eastern Ladakh, with 1-to-1 Independent Infantry Brigade and an additional Infantry BSF battalion deployed in the Kargil sector. The signing of the Peace and Tranquility Accord with China in 1993 resulted in further reduction of forces in Ladakh. Headquarters 17th Infantry Brigade handed over its operational responsibility to 114 Infantry Brigade and was placed at Khalsi in Ladakh as a reserve. Apparently, all this redeployment was accepted on account of the comparatively stable line of control with Pakistan east of the Zojila Pass and also the line of actual control with China. Further, in March 1997, prior to the Jammu and Kashmir State Assembly elections, 70 Infantry Brigade was also moved to the Kashmir Valley and got sucked into counter-terrorism operations. This gradual thinning out of troops from eastern and western Ladakh between 1991 and 1997 would have definitely been noticed by Pakistan, and this factor may have contributed to the decision to intrude into the Kargil sector in 1999. On the eve of the Kargil War, the operational deployment under 3 Infantry Division was 1-to-1 Independent Infantry Brigade with 4 Infantry Battalions and 1 BSF battalion responsible for the area along the line of control between Kaubal Gully to Chor Batla, and 102 Infantry Brigade responsible for the area along the line of control and AGPL from south of Turtuk to Siala. And 70 Infantry Brigade with only 1 battalion was located near Leh as a reserve in Ladakh. Talking about the deployment, there has been considerable misunderstanding about the gaps in the defenses of 1-to-1 Independent Infantry Brigade. All defenses in the mountains inevitably have gaps in between. It is neither physically possible nor tactically desirable to cover the entire length of any border with manpower. Gaps between such deployments are either held thinly or only patrolled, but must always be kept under surveillance. This pattern of deployment with long gaps between the defenses was followed on either side of the line of control. Gaps in defenses existed and continue to exist, though much smaller now, on both sides of the line of control. Such gaps were unavoidable due to the terrain being barren and glaciated and high mountain ridges and limited roads and tracks. And also the vastness of the area stretching almost 170 kilometers, which precluded continuous deployment due to constraints of manpower and maintenance requirement. The Pakistani preparation for its intrusion into Kargil sector covered a period of at least 2 years and was the subject of a well-conceived and executed deception plan. Also, the relatively mild winter of 1998-99 brought virtually no snow up to the end of February. And the general belief is that the intrusion started soon after Musharraf assumed the post of the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan on 8th of October. It was only on the 3rd of May 99 the local people first reported the presence of unidentified personnel in the higher reaches of the Kargil sector. Recce patrols over the next few days, along with extensive aerial recce, ascertained the magnitude of Pak intrusion into the Indian territory. And once the magnitude of the intrusion had been ascertained, it was aptly clear that it was beyond the capability of 3 Infantry Division to clear the intrusions with their integral reserves. And thus the juggernaut of the Indian Army got moving. 8th Mountain Division, which was the Northern Command Reserve and deployed in counter-terrorism role in Kashmir Valley, was disengaged completely and tasked to take over the operational responsibility of the Mashko and Dras sectors by 1st of June. Additional artillery, Bofors, and medium artillery regiments and 122 mm rocket batteries were moved to the Kargil sector to achieve greater fire superiority. 6th Mountain Division, already warned, was staged forward to Baltal. The movement of additional air defense regiments and army helicopter flights, recce and observation were also ordered. More than 19,000 tons of ammunition was moved from various depots, mostly across the Zojila Pass, for additional troops deployed in the Kargil sector. Once the Indian Army set forth its forward move to recapture the areas, there was no turning back. The plan was prepared to evict Pakistan troops from the Indian side of the line of control, and to avert escalation of the conflict, the Indian government stipulated that the line of control should not be crossed by the Indian armed forces. And it was soon realized that the operations to recapture the ridge lines back from Pakistan regulars and not terrorists would be extremely challenging. Infantry assault would have to be launched along the narrow spur lines at very high altitudes while facing heavy enemy fire from multiple directions. The first air-to-ground strikes by fighter aircraft of the Indian Air Force were launched on 26th of May as part of Operation Safedh Sagar. All 3 services came together to launch the Tri-Services Joint Plan. And meanwhile, the Navy, which was unencumbered by the constraint of not crossing the line of control, deployed proactively in full strength to signal that any expansion of conflict would result in the full might of our military being brought to bear upon Pakistan. Talking about my battalion, 13 Jackref, we were lucky to get an opportunity to take part in Operation Vijay. And I consider myself to be fortunate to have got the opportunity to command 13 Jackref in the most defining phase in the history of the battalion, when the battalion played a very important role in turning the tide in Operation Vijay. During this operation, my battalion launched 4 successful attacks and captured 4 features. These were 2 in the Dras subsector, that is the Hum complex and the point 5140 on the Toloing Ridge, and 2 in the Mashko Valley subsector, that is point 4875 and Ledge. The capture of point 5140 by my battalion and the famous success signal of Captain Vikram Batra, Ye Dil Mange More, established the credentials of the unit in the battle zone. After the capture of point 5140, we de-inducted on the 25th of June and were hoping for some respite. It was not to be. On 29th of June, we were handpicked by General Mahindapuri, the GOC 8 Mountain Division, for the capture of point 4875 in the Mashko Valley as part of 79 Mountain Brigade. Point 4875 was strategically very important as it dominated a vast stretch of National Highway 1 Alpha, and the enemy sitting here could easily take pot shots at our logistics and combat convoys. Its importance was realized by the enemy also, considering the fact that 63 Pakistani bodies and 70 weapons were recovered in the brigade attack from point 4875. No wonder this battle was referred to as the bloodiest battle of Operation Vijay. 13th Jagraf etched its name in the history of the Indian Army, as mentioned, honored with 37 gallantry awards, including 2 Paramveer Chakras, 8 Veer Chakras, and 14 Sena medals, a feat unparalleled in the war history of the nation. Besides the personal experience, the Kargil conflict was a landmark event in the subcontinental roller coaster timeline. In the context of previous wars, Kargil and the events beyond challenged the status quo at several levels. Firstly, in contrast to the 1971 Indo-Pak War, there was a conscious decision by the two countries to restrict their operations to a limited theatre of war, despite a large array of armed forces available to both. Secondly, the decision to breach an international understanding by Pakistan when its forces crossed the line of control was a direct invitation to use force, a reality in the context of two nuclear-armed countries that went against conventional wisdom. This saw the pursuit of a conventional war, despite its limited context, under ominous nuclear overhang. India's objective was primarily to achieve status quo ante and force Pakistan's return, or the Pak Army's return, across the line of control and restore its sanctity. There's little doubt that this objective was ensured by the country over a period of 3 months. Besides this, the resultant achievements went beyond the stated goal. India emerged as a more mature and stable country, which could handle its status as a nuclear power, unlike Pakistan. The unintended consequences of the period also witnessed a series of dialogue that built the foundation for a breakthrough with the United States. The trust that was created allowed the building of a strategic partnership. However, by the time the curtains fell on the Kargil episode, Pakistan had lost the leverage it had gained in 1998 after the nuclear test. Intended otherwise, India had emerged as with major diplomatic gains, especially in contrast to Pakistan. Looking at the principal strategic lessons that India learned from Kargil, firstly, the big lesson we learned was that we should be prepared for Pakistani recklessness, which could occur in different areas and take different forms. Terrorism throughout India, conventional operations, incursions, increased terrorism in Kashmir, and a variety of non-traditional threats. We should be more aggressively counter Pakistani threats along the line of control by investing in more technologically advanced military and intelligence equipment. We need to recognize the utility of the media in contemporary conflicts and continue its offensive in the information war. That we learned are that the units and formations require a certain minimum period of reorientation when there is a change in the role and operational environment. All formations, units, subunits require sufficient time for reconnaissance, planning, preparation for any offensive mission, and this must never be compromised. In high-altitude mountains, classic set-piece unidirectional attacks are unlikely to succeed. During Operation Vijay, multi-directional attacks were found to be the only successful method of unbalancing the enemy and maintaining the moment of attack. The application of combat superiority for an attack, even up to the ratio of 8:1, was found to be inadequate. When troops are required to scale heights, particularly above 14,000 feet, and still be fit enough for hand-to-hand fight after reaching the top, physical fitness gains paramount importance. In high-altitude warfare, more than anywhere else, a young profile of officers and men in combat units is very, very vital. There is a much greater need for artillery and its ammunition, as the rate of movement in altitude of mountains is very, very slow. The unconventional use of artillery in direct firing role was a game changer. Logistics bases have to be located as far forward as possible with multiple means of transportation. Helicopter evacuation of casualties is the most effective method in high altitudes. And finally, media played a very important role in this war, and we need to keep this in mind. Looking at the current situation that is prevailing, since 1999, we have evolved a robust response mechanisms to handle any situation of this nature in the future. The raising of 14 corps in Leh and the permanent deployment of 8 mountain divisions at Kargil have added the much needed heft to the Indian defensive architecture. The area that was once held with 1 brigade has a deployment of 3 infantry brigades and the presence of a reserve brigade within 14 corps to respond to any contingency. Besides the force infusion, a series of efforts to enhance the technological capability of the forces deployed has been made. The intelligence failure which precipitated the crisis has been mitigated by grab, flee surveillance of the line of control with surveillance devices like radars, electro-optical devices. Dead zones have been covered with aerial vectors and eyes in the sky in the form of RPAs and drones which maintain a 24/7 vigil. The raising of the aviation brigade in Leh with adequate effort for both reconnaissance and middle lift has provided commanders with the flexibility in relocation of troops when required. Troops in battle can only be sustained when adequate infrastructure has been created to support the forward deployment. So credit here goes to the BRO and the combat engineers, where almost all the posts have been connected to the road network with minimum and off-track. The availability of helipads at most posts provides troops the confidence and logistic support and medical care even in the worst of the weather conditions and adds to the morale and motivation. As we stand today, a Kargil-like event cannot be repeatable in Pakistan, and such a misadventure in any area along the line of control is now a pipe dream for the adversary. The recent force infusion into Eastern Ladakh after Snow Leopard has further enhanced the force potential of 14 Corps with the presence of LRVs like Smirch, Pinnacle, BrahMos missile systems, which can swing roles from eastern to western Ladakh in no time. And also the accretion forces present at all times in 14 Corps also caters for immediate response in the form of acclimatized troops readily available for a response to any contingency. Finally, the challenge of attempting to evaluate the trajectory of future wars is not unique in the subcontinent and is fraught with danger of almost always getting it wrong. The reason that the future is difficult to predict is that it depends on choices that are yet to be made, including by our governments in circumstances that remain uncertain. There's greater reliance on employing elements of hybrid warfare to serve the larger strategic ends of the country. Pakistan's hybrid war against India is spearheaded by a sub-conventional component, which is terrorism in Kashmir. However, the responses of India post-Uri and Pulwama terrorist attacks has denied Pakistan a contrived notion of victory that they were seeking through a sub-conventional conflict. The future trajectory of Indo-Pak continuum of conflict can be defined from the following factors. Firstly, there is no soft power without hard power. We need to continue to build smart power. India has to have the economic tools and the military power prior to exerting social, moral, and narrative dimensions to its power calculus. Multi-agency cooperation and synergy with all vectors of comprehensive national power to achieve the desired effect is a must. Indian armed forces need to fully embrace the fact that the power competition in the subcontinent is a long fight, and we need to get comfortable operating in the gray zone. While we should be prepared to engage our rivals through large-scale conventional means, there is much more that can be done in the cyber domain and the electronic spectrum that can have a direct effect on the ability of our adversaries to conduct operations. India will have to look after for itself. Moreover, with no membership of a formal security alliance and an unlikely prospect that will ever become so, there will always be limits to India's foreign security partnership and defense cooperation. Therefore, we will have to chart out sooner or later a path based on self-reliance or Atmanirbharta to protect and advance our security interests. Strengthening Atmanirbhar Bharat is an absolute necessity now. Heavy imports are not only a drain on precious foreign exchange reserves, but also leave vulnerable during a crisis. Anything can be weaponized. Weaponization creates paranoia and the impression that nothing is immune from being turned into a vector of violence. As Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, has remarked, that when you read a newspaper article, you are reading a weaponized text. In a nutshell, from information to financial protocols like SWIFT, to civilian airspace, to social media-based business, to international sporting bodies. Everything is a vector of imposing one's will on the adversary. And India should try to have at least one globally powerful platform in all these areas. In the future of conflict and competition with Pakistan and China is indeed more likely to reflect the tenets of hybrid war. Then the options that will emerge for India must relate to every facet of this hybrid war, from diplomacy to higher direction of war and warfighting, to strategic communication. The conceptualization, planning, execution, and follow-up actions in all these areas must all relate closely to the changes that are influencing on how nations are likely to contest others. The importance of hybrid war, or whichever name that these may be called by, remains the most important factor driving future conflict and competition. To have any chance of success against two powerful authoritarian states bent on asserting their own sphere of influence, India must act early and resolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. Jai Hind.
He had covered the geostrategic construct and the operational situation of 1999. And also he talked about Operation Badr, the aim and scope of what Musharraf had in mind, who was smarting from our operations during Meghdoot. One of some of the important points, he talked about terrain. He talked about valor of juniors. He talked about role of media. He talked about criticality of intelligence. He talked about centrality of hybrid warfare and future conflicts between India and her adversary. He talked of need for Atmanirbhar Bharat and need for economically strong India. He kind of asked us to be prepared for the grey zone conflicts, which will be more in future to come, and need for multi-agency cooperation. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Lieutenant General Dr. Konsam Himalay Singh, Param Vishesh Seva Medal, Uttam Yuddha Seva Medal, Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, and Yuddha Seva Medal. General KH, as he is popularly known, was commissioned in 2 Rajput in 1978 and commanded 27 Rajput during Kargil War in Chalunka, Turtuk sector and in Siachen during the same period. He commanded both a division and a corps in Northern Command. He has also been the commandant of the prestigious infantry school. During the Kargil War, he successfully led his battalion to recapture Chor Batla, point 5770 near NJ 489842 and point 5810 in Ladakh range, which unsettled the grand plan of the Pak army to regain Turtuk, Chalunka and Siachen Glacier. He has been the first, some of the great firsts with him. He has been the first Lieutenant General from Northeast and the first Brigadier and Major General from Manipur. Post-retirement, he has been the chairman of Manipur Public Service Commission. In his younger days, he has been a great mountaineer and he has done a lot of rafting. In fact, even as a CO, he rafted in Shiok and that was the first, though he never claimed credit for it. That is his one. He has been a soldier scholar and has authored 2 books. One of them is with me here, that is Making of a General, Himalayan Echoes, a number of chapters in a number of edited books. The good general has agreed to share his perspective on Kargil War as a commanding officer during that period. Over to General KH for his address.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sir, thank you very much, General Choudhary, for the introduction I'm really happy to be introduced by my ex-DS and CDM 2002. I am also delighted to be amongst the co-panelists whom I know, General Joshi, as also our and also General Chaturvedi, whom I hold in very high regard. Thank you very much, sir, for inviting me. First of all, I thank General Joshi for having given a very, very wide canvas as a prelude to the Kargil War, as also the strategic perspective of our defense forces as well as our country. So that sets the stage for it makes it easy for me to describe what were my experience during the period. I shall restrict my talk to about 15 minutes or so, particularly on a subject from a CO's viewpoint. This is what was the topic given to me, a perspective from a CO's viewpoint during the war. General Joshi has described broadly what happened, in the entire from Jojila to Chorbatla. I shall briefly give the background as to the operations north of Kardungla. That is where I was generally involved for over 2.5 years. 1 year prior to the Kargil War and another 1.5 years after the war. There's a small correction, Sir General Chaturvedi, about that. Chorbatla was not my area of operations. Chorbatla was by Ladakh Scouts. But Turtok Chalunka and NJ 9842 South Glacier, this was the area of my, operational area of my unit. Thank you very much, sir. The situation prevailing north of Kardungla, I shall begin around 1998, around the second half of 1998. There were certain activities that was being reported across the LOC and also across the AGPL over a period of at least 4 to 5 months, I think. We didn't know what was happening across, but we did know a number of visits by General Musharraf and also logistics build-up of an unusual kind. So this happened till about September, October, November, December of 1998. We also had multiple inputs of information from our own intelligence sources. Why I'm saying information is that they were not, at least to the battalion commander, we did not get it as an intelligence. A process information turns into intelligence. But what we got was pieces of hundreds of inputs in the form of information. Every day we used to hear this. In response, my battalion was tasked to do patrolling in that 60 kilometers gap between Chorbatla and the Taxi battalion. Approximately there is a gap of about 60 kilometers along the Ladakh range. So we did that patrolling over a period of 3 to 4 months. In fact, General Musharraf in his book has quoted the intensive patrolling by Indian Army, that is my battalion, as one of the provocations for Kargil War in 1999. I don't know how far it is true, but he has mentioned that in his book. So the situation obtaining in 1998 in the areas north of Kardungla were that intensification of shelling from various medium guns of Pakistani army, and also buildup was generally known. But buildup where, for what purpose, their intentions, and what were the activities, detailed activities were not known to us. In fact, we were also told, my battalion was told to be prepared for any operations even during the end of 1998. So I suppose that there was an information gap of a huge magnitude in the end of 1998. Now, as we in the thick of winters around December, January, February of 98-99, my battalion was, got back to Leh for about 2 to 3 months. And after that, we were told that we should be ready to move back to areas in the areas of Chalunka, Turtuk sector again. I mean, earlier than March, April or so. So we were prepared to go back again. But during this time, there were many further inputs. Like, for example, in April, we saw about at least many sorties of Puma Haptors with underslung loads were being carried. And I also had the privilege of going on a Haptor recce with General Budwar, who was a GOC 3 Div. And I did see footprints, particularly in the Moscow Valley area. Why I went with him is because I was also, my unit was also the QRF, Quick Reaction Force Battalion. So by March, I think reasonable inputs were there that there have been some kind of a intrusion of what nature we never knew. It was borne by the fact that the footmarks were visible in very, very isolated areas where it was fully snowbound. And also the increase in intensity of firing. So till about April or so, we did not know. In fact, so much about the intelligence is on the 3rd of May, 1999. That is the day when the movement of the Pakistani intruders were detected. On the 3rd of May, I, along with at least about 80 soldiers of my unit, we decided to cross the Ladakh range, cross country in a pass called Digarla, and from Leh to Khalsar, we decided to track. So it was on the night of 6th of May that somehow I got through the brigade commander, and he asked me that how soon can you de-induct and then get to Kargil. So I said, sir, I am on somewhere in the in the middle of Ladakh range. I'll take at least 2 days to reach the roadhead and also to collect the battalion. I think by that time, they had taken a decision to move first the 56th Brigade from the valley to Kargil. So I was left on the other side itself. Then I knew something serious was happening. So till then, in the area of Chalunka, Turtuk, Taxi area, there were only 2 infantry battalions around in the holding road. That is part of Southern Glacier Battalion and also the Taxi Battalion. And my battalion was to relieve, first do the patrolling and to relieve 5 para or the Southern Glacier Battalion if required. So that was the situation. Thereafter, things moved very fast, actually. People realize the seriousness of the activities, operational situation in the Kargil area. So having been acclimatized early, 5 para was told to be relieved by my battalion, and they were heli lifted back to Kargil area. So it remains, 12 Zart and my battalion was in that area. Multiple sources of information, as I said, information came about the possible intrusion into the 60 kilometers gap between Sorbatla and V-Cut, we call it, the Taxi Battalion. And it was later on proved by one of my patrol. In fact, Captain Hanifuddin of 11 Rajrif was under command me till 2 days before he was shot. So a large number of telltale signs of intrusion had been detected. This is in around May, first week of, second week of May. That is the time when we knew, or at least the formation knew, that things are beginning to look very serious, even in areas north of Khardungla. For whatever reasons, as a CO, I didn't have much idea as to how the operations north of Khardungla have been kept in some kind of a low, low visibility as far as media is concerned. In fact, I must say that hardly anybody knew what was happening on the other side. I can also state that General VP Malik, I have met him multiple times, even as late as just 1 month back here. So he was, as a chief, he also didn't seem to know the details of what was happening, because the entire media, entire national attention was on the Tiger Hill and Tololing, that kind of a situation. But slowly, the corps, the division was, 3 infantry division was able to move 3 more battalions into that sector. We had 3 battalions additional, and also another Vikas battalion by the time, by middle of May or end of May or so. It was inducted because of the magnitude of intrusion that had taken place in that area. So the fighting started, as early as I think middle of June. By the time Tololing had been captured, it was a huge success and morale booster for all of us, in fact. And my battalion was tasked to capture point 5770, which is about close to 19,000 feet, because enemy had intruded and also occupied that feature. So we, I'll just only say that because of the terrain and because of the cliff, nearly a kilometer high cliff that we had to resort to a daylight assault, a silent day attack, in the sense that no artillery was used, artillery was kept on call. And it was by a small team. In fact, it was a company action. Company less a platoon, to be precise, in addition to the reorg party and the various other bases that we had to. So it was done on 27th of June, and it was also a Tuesday. Rajputs believe in Lord Hanuman's Day, and that was a huge success. Though, of course, the rope fixing had been done over a period of about 3 to 4 nights, rope fixing. So therefore, it was a huge success on 27th of June, 1999. We didn't suffer any casualty during the attack, but however, during the course of counter-attack bombarding, I think we lost, unfortunately, we lost 2 young boys, just hardly about 3 years of service. In fact, the US Naval War College research on the Kargil War has, in their paper, they have written that capture of Tololing, Tiger Hill, and point 5770 was the turning point in the war. That is what they say. Whereas I suspect that our MO or our command headquarters didn't have much idea about what was happening on the north of Khardungla, or more particularly about my unit as well. So what was my impression as a CO? So I will just give a brief reflection of my, as a CO's perspective. I felt that it was a tactical victory by us, but it was a strategic, I think, I won't say failure, but it was a setback, definitely a setback. And secondly, decision-making at the higher levels appeared to be, in the beginning at least, to me, I mean, I was, as a CEO, I was surprised as to, what kind of a decision I felt that decision making would have been, little more prompt, little more, well considered from the point of operational effectiveness. I'll give you one small example, like as far as, all arms and artillery, the engineers, the logistics, the Air Force, every arm and service, I think they played their part extremely well, in that battle. But what I found was, it is just on the lighter note, please don't take it seriously. I had demanded a satellite photograph of the area of my interest, and you'll be surprised that I received that a year and a half later when I was battalion commander NDA. Since it is marked secret, so it had to come in my name. I mean, so somebody, we had to have our act together, and all the all the agencies needed to be a little more serious on these issues. And another factor which I like to say is the sighting of UAVs. November 98, definitely we saw UAVs, and one of the artillery COs, Colonel Choudhary, who was commanding that light regiment there, one day he invited me, to show me the UAV. It didn't come. So 3-4 days he kept on inviting me in the evening, and I had to tell him, friend, why are you inviting me every day for a drink? Later on, it turned out that he just wanted a confirmation from me, because he was being touted as daydreaming, or he didn't have. And he was told by his seniors that, such UAVs don't exist anymore, which can fly at 18,000 feet. So these were some of the drawbacks, which I would say that nobody ever believed that, Pakistani had used UAVs that time. But whereas actually on ground, it was there. So, what do I have for as a lesson from CEO's perspective, which I should share with people? As I said, I don't know much about what was happening that time at the corps or division level, but I definitely felt that staff work at various level was left much to be desired, and units, I think, were generally, I'll say, that left to ourselves as far as the actual execution of task is concerned, besides, of course, mandatory logistics and firepower support, which was forthcoming quite well. One issue that I will flag here is that professional dishonesty, integrity of many people during the war came into question. I will leave it at that, because in the future, unless there is professional ethics or professional honesty, things can go wrong again. I'm sure that each one of you know what I'm referring to, the culture of professionalism at all levels. I'm not just talking about the immediate headquarters, but I feel that future is very important as far as professional honesty is concerned. So when I went back to NDA, or in fact my management courses and NDC, all my thesis, all my dissertations were on this, professionalism and professional ethics. And I decided that when I was in NDA, ethics, it will be the mainstay of what I'm going to influence the cadets, because of my lessons from from the war. Next is the physical fitness. The motivation to remain fit must be supreme. otherwise, if the system motivates people to be unfit, then we will get unfit operational outcomes. To all the COs, I'll say the buck stops at CO's level. Come what may, any number of headquarters, any layers of headquarters, I think finally the buck stops at the commanding officer's level. You are responsible. I was responsible for deciding that it will be a day attack. It was a huge gamble. I mean, I don't know how I would have taken this decision as a corps commander. Another factor I would like to say is the small teams. Small teams are the answer in mountains and such kind of a this thing. Next point I'll say is that regimental spirit. The success at Tololing was one of the key elements of motivation of my troops. The regimental spirit is the key. And motivation has to be through personal example as far as up to brigade and the commanding officer level are concerned. It is not that I had many failings even during this period. One of the failing that I had was that after the capture of a main objective such as 5770, I did not take the initiative, to exploit further, and because they had vacated the next. Later on, I learned that they had vacated the neighboring post as well. So that was one of my personal failing, and also another lost opportunity was 1998. I got orders. Thang top. There was a very, very dominating height must be occupied. Special forces and various Ladakh Scouts, they had tried and they couldn't do it, but then somehow our boys were able to do it. This is prior to the war. But somehow due to some decision-making problems in the intermediate headquarters, I had to vacate it before the first light. So that is still with the Pakistanis. They occupied it during. So I feel that it was a lost opportunity. So these are some of the failings as a commanding officer. I mean, I should have put my neck out and said that, these must be held. So these are some of the lessons that I would like to share. So I feel that I really salute all the soldiers, officers and men, and also of all the support, logistics, arms and the services with whom I had the privilege to operate during that period. With this, I thank you for your patient listening. Thank you very much. And I think Srinjoy, I can see you. Srinjoy is, I think, next in line. Thank you. Nice to see you, Srinjoy. Thank you very much once again. And thank you, sir. Thank you.
General sir, you are muted, sir. General Chaturvedi sir, you are muted.
Then about sorry. Again, I'll repeat. Thank you, General KH. That was a wonderful presentation. And during his presentation and talk, he mentioned about lack of information and criticality of intelligence. That remains the General Joshi had also mentioned. But as a commanding officer, one has to read early indicators, which they did. And he was not found caught napping because he was quite abreast to the developing situation. His point about that attack on Tuesday, in his book also he mentions that. And this is, there's another great general is here, General Chachra, and he mentioned once that his unit, the entire unit used to do fast on Tuesday because Jai Bajrang Bali ki Jai is their Nara, and that is how the Rajput regiment is. He mentioned that the relevance of that, how Musharraf's objectives were kind of thwarted by his having captured 5770, along with some others doing Tololing and Tiger Hill. He said the lesson learned was, while it was a tactical victory, but a strategic setback. Decision making should have been more prompt. The case of Thang Top and also of the satellite imagery is not only humor in uniform, but a sense of it does set us for reflecting. And need for continuously upgrading technology is one of the points we mentioned. He did mention about that CO is the most important cog in this any kind of a operation, and so we need to invest into them more and more. Small teams are very important. Regimental spirit and personal examples are important. All it is left for me to say thank you, Jan KH, for such a wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Srinjoy Choudhary. Srinjoy has been an alumnus of Lamartine, Kolkata and Presidency College, Kolkata. He is an experienced journalist who has worked both in print as well as in electronic media. During Kargil War, he was with the Statesman, though he was working with the Telegraph. And he had first-hand experience of the war zone from Dras to Batalic as a war correspondent. He chronicled his experience in the form of a book, which I have with me here, Dispatches from Kargil. He's a prolific author and has authored 4 more books, including one on the hijacking of IC-814. He has also been a teacher at Delhi School of Communication. He also takes occasional classes at a number of other institutions. Presently, he is the consulting editor, National Affairs with Times Now. One very unique feature of Srinjoy is that from 2005, ever since Times Now came up, he has been with Times Now in a electronic media where I think the journalist changed. Srinjoy is a pillar of strength. He's going to talk about Kargil War as he saw. Over to Sri Srinjoy Choudhary for his perspective.
Thank you, General Chaturvedi. It's actually an honor to speak after 2 very distinguished generals, one of whom actually wished me just now, and I count as a very good friend. Let me start very quickly, and I start with a very hot evening, a beastly evening in Delhi. This must be towards the end of May, perhaps the 25th or so. I was coming back from South Block, and as soon as I got to my office, I was told, here are 12,000 rupees. We want you in Kargil, and we want you to leave tonight. Now, the Statesman is not a very wealthy paper. It doesn't have the kind of logistic support that many other papers, like Times Now has, which makes it much easier. So I didn't know how to go to Kargil. I didn't know what to do. But the important point was I had to go. And I had to go that night. So I got home, packed as quickly as I could. And I made 3 telephone calls. The first was to my girlfriend, telling her that I was going. And she said she would come back. By the time she came back, I had already left. In fact, there was a glass of water. I had left a glass of cold water on the fridge. And she said that by the time I came back, you had gone, but the water was still cold, which means you had just left. Secondly, I called the office and I spoke to the editor. And the editor said, go tonight and go as close as you can get to the war. And thirdly, and most importantly, as far as Kargil is concerned, I spoke with a family friend who was a major general then in Udhampur. And I told him that I had to cover Kargil. So the first thing and the only thing he could tell me before the line snapped was come to Udhampur. Now here I was on a late in the evening, and I didn't know how to go to Udhampur. I went to New Delhi railway station. They said there's no train from here, go to Old Delhi. Finally, I got to Old Delhi. I didn't have a car in those days, so it was all bus and auto. And then I got to Old Delhi. They said, fine, we'll put you on a train. It will be sleeper. So I said, fine. And I was in Udhampur. Things got a lot more objective and straightforward after that. There I met the family friend who helped me. Then, of course, I met Major General PPS Bindra, who was MGGS. He gave me an interview. And my friend said, I'll put you on, the convoys are beginning. I'll put you on a convoy and you will go to Kargil. The convoy took me to Srinagar. And from Srinagar, while I was there, I met someone very fortuitous and very fortunate too. He was a colonel who was going to Budkharbu. So he said, come on, get in the jeep, you come with me. So off we went. And I think it was late in the evening when I got to Matayan. It was late. He said that we'd stop there for the evening, and we were there in the evening. The fact, there are two things I remember from that evening and getting up early in the morning. One was after Delhi, it was really cold. And the fact that there was no acclimatization or anything for me, I just had to go. So there I was. Luckily, he gave me an overcoat as well. The other thing, of course, was warm food and the sound of artillery. That is the first time I remember waking up in the morning and hearing artillery blasting away. And that was really my introduction to the war. From there, I stopped at Kargil, and that is where I operated from. I came back for a brief while because I ran out of money, went back again, and I was there till after the ceasefire. Point two, I've broken up my speech into discourse into segments. The point two is really about then Major General and then after that Lieutenant General Mohinder Puri. The first time I met Mohinder Puri was in Matayan, probably 3-4 days after I got there to Kargil. And I was in Matayan somewhere and he said, what are you doing here? I said, I was here yesterday. What are you doing here? Then he told me. And I cannot say how helpful the Indian Army, beginning with him, of course, there were some exceptions, but beginning with General Puri, right down to the Jawan, was to all of us, at least to me. And each officer, young, whether middle level, general, were all very helpful, right down to the Jawan. And that is really something I will take back. I remember one time I was speaking with General Puri, and I said, what are you going to do? This was very early in the battle. He said, I'm not going to push troops up right now. It's not my job to do it. I want to have enough equipment. I want to have the artillery in place. I want to have the soldiers properly trained. I want them properly equipped. I want them to have the right weapons. And then I won't push them up straight off. I will take on the enemy from 3 or 4 sides. I was wondering, this is a man who's telling me what he's going to do. Should I put this out? And I asked him. He said, yes, do that. I'm sure there was a reason for his telling me that. And I promise you, it turned out to be wonderful. And this is exactly how it was with virtually the entire army, particularly all those people in Retd, because they became friends of mine. And I'll give you another example. There was a young officer at 16 Ren, and I would go and see him from time to time. And he liked the fact that when I saw him, I knew who he was from his rank, what his ribbons said, whether he'd served high altitude or gone abroad or whatever it was. And he was so open and clear and frank with me. And these are things I have very clear memories of. There was a friend to Naga. Remember one day I'd gone behind Dras and gone across to that side, towards that Mashko side. And I was standing there waiting to meet someone. He said, what are you doing here? I'd met him a day earlier. He said, come with me. And he took me. It was a long walk and then a climb up a steep hill. And we went to his mortar position. And I was there the whole day with him. We chatted for a long time. I sat while his troops fired mortars. Then I spoke with his men. Then right next to him were a Jat battalion. I spoke to their officers and men. It was very, very open, very conducive. Then you got back and wrote your story. In fact, even on the other side, in Da, in Batalik, there were officers who became friends of mine. There was another officer in the AMC who was there for a long time. I would go to his room, we'd chat, he would tell me lots of things. Brigadier All, who later became Major General All, I remember walking into his brigade one day, and naturally, after if you've been covering a war, you don't look like a fashion model. You look very bedraggled. I said, look, it's almost irresponsible of me to come to your lunch dressed the way I am. He said, don't worry about it. The next time I have a lunch, you'll be okay. This is war. These were the kind of people who stood up and helped me. And I can't forget how helpful all of them have been. I'll give you an example. Say the night Tiger Hill happened. We knew the day it was going to happen. We knew the time it was going to happen. And it was not just me. There were about 20 reporters who were hanging around there waiting for the battle to begin. So that was the level of closeness we had with what the war was going on. We knew the Battle of Tiger Hill was going to take place 2 days before, and we all planned for it. And we were all there, and we were all witnesses to the battle starting. And many of us stayed all night just to see how it went on. But we knew. How did we know? We knew because officers and men told us about it. They said, this is where the battle will be. You guys hang out, which is what we did at our own risk. Point 3, the dangers we faced. When you go as a journalist to cover a war, you have never done it before. You've done lots of things, but there is nothing in the world that you can learn about being under fire, particularly for a civilian. But we had to do it. It was our job. There were at least 3 reporters who were injured by shell fire. They're all right now, but they were injured then. But there were 2 or 3 things. The first was, I think it was more worrying to be under small arms fire. And I don't know what it's like now. There is a place near Tololing where you have to, when you're going to Srinagar from Kargil, you have to do a U-turn and come back, then do another U-turn and come back. That was a very sort of complicated kind of journey. And that was when once we were under small arms fire. It was a slightly hairy experience. More than that was the night, I think, Tiger Hill got taken. We were all standing around like it was a film set, and we saw the the 150.
The speaker is muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I told myself, it was a superstitious thing. I told myself, there are all these shell casings there. They are so beautiful to look at. You want to pick one up, you want to take one home, don't even touch them. If you touch a shell will touch you. I promise you, I didn't touch a single shell casing all those days, and no shell touched me. There were 3-4 guys who got hit. Well, they're okay now, nothing to worry about. But I can tell you this, that it was an experience for a journalist. It was your job to go. You went, you covered the war, and you came back. As far as the coverage is concerned, the biggest problem, and this is something all of us will face in the future, is the level of communication. Because there were 2 phones in Kargil, 2 public phones and 1 in the hotel. There was a fax. The fax would go, but it would not reach. And the phones were so bad, it was almost one way. When you called someone, you could barely hear. A lot of times I dictated my speeches, my stories. And when I did, the person on the other side in Delhi could barely hear me. My news editor herself used to take it down sometimes, and she would say, I can barely hear you. I can barely hear you. I had to shout at the top of my voice. One time I remember I was doing a story from a public booth, and naturally I was shouting at the top of my voice. And I'd spoken with people, and he told me very graphic details of what had happened, bodies lying in the snow, this, that, so on and so forth. I can't remember exactly what it was. And then after it, I found that there was one guy, local, listening intently. So after it, he approached me. He said, all this you've described, did you actually imagine it? Or did someone actually tell you this? So this was what it was like. It was so different in every way. Phones were impossible. Faxes were zero. And cars, you need to move around. From Kargil to Dras was 2,000 rupees. If I had gone with 12,000, how long is it going to last? These were things one had to work out gradually, share this, that. A lot of the work had to be done together. For instance, cars. TV guys were allowed cars. I was a reporter from a newspaper. I wasn't allowed, but luckily I had friends in TV. They said, okay, get in the car with us. I think only one journalist, print journalist, was allowed a car because she said that she had a back problem. You know, everyone can't get back problems. So I never had a car. I couldn't have afforded one. But the fact that I was able to cover it is also because of friends and colleagues who were really considerate, and we all worked together. Next point, the coverage per se, regardless of the problems that we faced. One thing we were told in Delhi, that no one will speak to you in Kargil anywhere unless you have been cleared by us, whatever it was. When I got to Kargil, I found it was exactly the opposite. Every officer, every Jawan, from the top to the bottom, beginning with Mohinder Puri, middle-level officers, young officers, men, they were so happy to speak to us. And not only did they speak to us, they were almost grateful that we were there, because they realized that while they had to be there, we didn't have to be there. But we were. And we wanted to tell their stories. We wanted to say what was happening. And I can't tell you how happy they were. And they spoke to me, each, almost 90% of the people I met there were happy to see me and to speak to me. There were some people, perhaps only a handful of people at Retd HQ, I never managed to speak with, but everyone else was so open. And perhaps Mohinder Puri has something to do with this, because once he spoke to me, it was probably a kind of message to everyone that, look, speak to the press. They are not here to store our happiness. They're just here to what's going on. And I have to say, I'm very happy with the kind of response I got from all the officers, all the men virtually I met. And I'll give you one example of how it was. One day I was standing somewhere near Mashko or something. There was this guy who came walking in towards me. I think he was from Tunaga. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm waiting to meet someone." He said, "Forget it, come with me." And I mentioned, I spent the whole day in his outfit. And his officers, his men were there. Right next was the Jat outfit. So these Jat guys, boys came to see me, speak to me. So I mentioned that I met one of your guys at a field hospital. And his name was Amra Ram. Believe me, you should have seen them. They said, "Sir ka to, he has a mind like a computer. He remembers Amra Ram, who was hit on the first day. He was hit in the neck, I think. First day or second day of the war." And they were so nice to me. When I was walking down, it was very steep. One of them suggested that I hold on to it. I refused. I said, "I won't do that." So one of them said, "Okay, I'm going to walk in front of you." Another guy said, "I'll walk on your side. So if you fall, as you could well, you will fall on us." Now, how touched I was at the end of the day when there are Jawans who have had 5-7 years who are telling me that, "Look, we are here to help you out. I promise you one thing, that I didn't fall. At least that embarrassment I avoided." But that is how it was. And it's not just the men, it's not just the officers, even with the Air Force. One day I was in Srinagar and there was an officer who I met who showed me around a little grudgingly. He had never ever met a journalist in his life, and the idea of being open never came to him at that. But this is just to explain to you that the friends you make in Kargil are the friends who stay with you all your life. I was standing outside RM's office one day, many, many years later, 20 years later, when this guy walks up to me and said, "Can you remember me?" I said, "Of course." That man was then the Vice Chief of Air Staff, Air Marshal B.S. Dhanwa, who later became Chief. And no one has been as helpful to me as he was when he was Chief. These are the friendships you make. Even Mohinder Puri, even today, he remains, I followed his career, his ups and downs in South Block, and even today, he remains a close friend. Whenever I've called him and said, "I need to speak to you, this is Kargil Divas," he said, "I will never say no to you." He has never forgotten it. The only problem I found, the only people who were not as open, and this again was a mixed thing, were actually the people who were supposed to tell us things, the PR people. Some of them were absolutely excellent. One of them sadly died in a terror attack. He was a good friend. But there were 2 or 3, they would not tell you or be helpful at all. And this system that the army did of sending 30 reporters in a bus around and then coming back to Srinagar. I did that a couple of times. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I chose, and
He's mute. I can't hear you. He's very
Srinjoy can't hear you.
can't hear you.
Srinjoy,
I'm surprised. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you now. I can
now
hear
it's
you
okay.
Okay. Now, okay. So here, 30 reporters all outside the 56th Brigade headquarters waiting for the battle to begin. Here, this bus full of 30 reporters taken by the army PR guys all the way to when all those 30 guys That was the most visible battle of whether in front of me. But in terms of visible battle that fought, but we were all there by the media. Next, and all that. Food. Kargil was not. So we lived on Maggi noodles and biscuits and chocolate. That's all stuff that I could take from Srinagar and would last. I don't know if I told you the story. One day I went to see a friend of mine in 16 Grand. And I was told by his staff that he had fever. So I said, he had fever, okay. So fine. I left my packet of biscuits and my chocolate, which was lunch, and went here, there, everywhere. On my way back, I said, let me just see how he is. And he was fine. And he said, to lunch kya khaya? You left your lunch for me. I said, no. He said, what did you eat? So I said, rice, dal, sabzi. So he said, what sabzi did you eat? So I said, lauki. He said, aaj to lauki nahi tha. Jhoot bol rahe. That means you haven't eaten. And if you haven't eaten, you're hungry and desperately hungry, I will give you lunch. And that's exactly what he did. These are people who became friends and are still friends. As I mentioned, when I went, I just had a parka and it wasn't good enough. A colonel of the army gave me an overcoat for a day or 2 days. The conditions, I stayed in a hotel which was very grandiosely called Siachen Hotel. It was neither Siachen nor much of a hotel. We got half a bucket of water. Whatever else we half a bucket. The bed we didn't. I would have rather it wasn't so cold because it was full of bugs. So you had all these things over on your body. In fact, officers who saw me said, why don't you, move into our brigade headquarters or something? I said, no, I have a hotel. It's my bed, my room. I'll continue to stay there. Finally, I'm grateful to General Choudhary for introducing the book to friends that has not been read. It's a book that has not for anybody's fault, but the publishers never bother about such things. But somehow, almost by accident, the book got written and the 20th anniversary edition also came out. For the 20th anniversary edition, I'd organized a discussion. The IIC wanted it. And General Puri was there. General Vinod Bhatia was there, one or two other people. And Vinod Bhatia asked me a series of questions. He's a very old friend. He said, you went to Kargil, you were there for 6-7 weeks. Did you have to go? Couldn't you have said no? I said, yes, I could have said no. But you went. I said, yes, I did. Did you have protective equipment, meaning a bulletproof jacket? Did you have medical insurance? I said, no. Did you have a special allowance? I said, no. And you still went? I said, yes. I didn't know this because I didn't know what other people said of me. I just did my work. But after I came back and my book came out, someone did a review. And apparently many of my other reporters, friends and colleagues realized what kind of risks I took. And they shouldn't have been taken in a real sense. You don't want to come under shell fire for fun. So they gave me a name which I didn't realize I had. It was called Mad Max. Finally, I will make just one point. This was something I should have made earlier when I was talking about communications. There were really two kinds of journalists, people of a higher caste and people of a lower caste. I belong to the lower caste, and I tell you what the difference is. The people who are at a higher level, I belong to the lower caste. I had no phones, no satellite phones. Believe me, the weapon of the war was the satellite phone for us. I didn't have it, but I still had to manage. And I'm really glad I did. Finally, thank you, General Choudhary. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
कौन कहता है आसमान में सुराख हो नहीं सकता, एक पत्थर तो उछालो तबीयत से यारों. Despite not having a bulletproof jacket, despite not having medical insurance, despite having very less money, despite not getting food at time, despite everything, Srinjoy, you managed, without satellite phone, you managed to communicate. And there is a famous saying in armed forces that response of people in Delhi is different. When you reach Ambala, it is different. When you cross Patni Top, it is different. Once you cross Pir Panjal, it's different. And once you cross Jozila, it is different. So as you keep growing, people are more helpful. And they not only they help you, they help themselves, because the kind of stories which you are telling today makes a sense of pride for us soldiers that we were helpful to you and information. But on a serious note, I think Srinjoy has raised some very, very useful thing, that we need to have a system of communicating whatever is happening. In an information warfare, there can't be information void. So at formation headquarters level, some kind of a system needs to be created. And that is one major point which has emerged from Srinjoy's presentation. Before I go to question answer session, we are privileged to have Air Marshal Tiwari, who has been CNC Central Command, with us. And there is no doubt that Air Force played a very, very important role in providing, contributing to the success of Kargil War. May I request Air Marshal Tiwari, who also happens to be a member of the strike, to in next 2 to 3 minutes, because we are running short of time, to share perspective on Operation Safedh Sagar. Over to Air Marshal Tiwari.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I am audible. Like General Chaturvedi said, I have a very limited time, but I'll try and cover up whatever is Air Force aspect. Incursion started first spotted on 3rd May. IAF launched its helicopters on 8th May. Helicopter reported some incursion, and the regular reconnaissance started by Jaguar and MiG-25s around 10th May. On getting the information, the fighter squad started moving into the valley from 11th May onwards. On 12th May, first of the IAF helicopter was shot but managed to land back with some rotor damage. Jaguar Canberra MiG-25 increased the reconnaissance. On 15th May, another IAF helicopter was shot, and but it also managed to land with rotor damage. And let me tell you, all this firing, all the helicopters were shot within own territory, our side of LOC. On 21st May, a Reiki Canberra was hit. It was doing a race course pattern over the area. On the 3rd run, it got hit, but landed back at Srinagar Airport, and it reported the eight enemy helipads in the area. So you can imagine the amount of preparation the enemy has done. On 25th May, PM approved IAF's participation in the conflict. On the request of HE Marshal Tipness, which was refused, he wanted us to cross the LOC and start attacking the enemy from the other side, but the Prime Minister was very clear about it. At no point of time the LOC can be crossed. So it created few issues for IAF, in which IAF learned few lessons, and adopted itself to the reality on the ground. First was the targets were around 4,000 to 5,500 meters. At this height, the fighters were rarely used anywhere in the world. At this height, the engine performance itself reduces. The weapon behaves in a different fashion because of different wind speed or the density. Targets were not usual what we have seen on the ground on the plains because targets were not as big. They were small and spread all over the place. Restriction of not crossing LOC means no one could be attacked in the north or south because turning radius will not permit you even if you are approaching from the north. So you could only attack from east or west. Due to in position of the enemy on the hilltops, FAC also could not be used. We had seen that the helicopters were getting shot well within our territory. So, and close air support, for close air support, FAC, that is forward air controller, is very much important. In the plains, a 25 or 40 yards error for a 1,000-pounder is not a big deal. But in the hills, it could make a lot of difference because within 25-50 yards, either you're on top of the hill or you're on slope. And if you're on slope, the slant distance can increase up to 1 kilometer or more, and which may result in fratricide. So there are a lot of problems, but the targets had to be hit. So initially, Air Force used MiG-21, MiG-27, and Mi-17 for these purposes. The aircraft faced heavy fire from the manpads and anti-aircraft guns. On 27th May, we lost 3 aircraft, 1 MiG-21, 1 MiG-27, and 1 Mi-17 helicopter. The loss of 2 fighters and 1 chopper, that was the time Air Force changed the tactics, and we withdrew the armed helicopter altogether because it was not, they were not making any effect, or they were in danger zone. And we started the steep glide bombing where the aircraft pulled out well before the manpad range. That means flying at about 30,000 feet, and from there you are attacking the target. Dropping the bombs, diving from 30,000 feet and getting out from much before the manpad range created its own problem. It was very difficult to spot the target. So we also resolved to the night strike. Night strike, where the manpads were not that effective, were carried out at 500 feet of height, which was for the first time anyone had done in the hills. To tell you about the enemy fire, during rest of season, about 100 surface to air missiles were fired, but not one aircraft were hit because we are taking the precaution now. We also modified our approach and used GPS. A lot of aircraft were of older variety. We didn't have GPS, so for accurate navigation, a slap on GPS was used in the aircraft. IF also resorted to drop the bombs on the hill slope to block the supply line and choose the impact point for landslide or avalanche. As the battle increased, the distance between the own troops and the enemy troops reduced. Now there was a need for pinpoint accuracy. That is where Mirage 2000 came. On one side, when this fight was going on the other side, the trials were going on at Bangalore and at other places to put lightning pod on the Mirage. While the fighting was going on, the lightning pod was put on the Mirages, and the Mirages started dropping laser guided bombs. That is where the enemy got worried. The day and night attack and accurate attack by the laser pods broke the enemy's morale. The Indian military intelligence intercepted numerous enemy radio transmission discussing several severe shortage of ration, water, medical supplies, and ammunition, as well as inability of occupying enemy units, as well as inability to evacuate their wounded. One important battlefield effect achieved by the IF Combat Air Patrol was that enemy helicopters also could not come and resupply or pick up the casualty. The most telling testament of IF's effectiveness was when Pakistan Foreign Minister Sartaj Aziz, during an official visit to New Delhi on June 12, came. He implored the IF to stop its airstrike as one of the 3 specific requests that he had levied on the Indian government. With all this, the war came to end at a much faster pace as earlier against what was imagined earlier. The war highlighted two basic assumptions. Despite whatever effort we make, we may not be possible to prevent a war. We cannot predict with certainty the pattern of war for which we have to prepare ourselves. It is especially when we are not an expeditionary force and we don't have any aim to occupy anyone's land. So we will always be in reaction and we will always have to be ready for any kind of emergency. On strategic front, although possession of nuclear weapon has made all-out war less likely, so long as we have the border and territorial dispute with Pakistan and China, Kargil type of military conflict cannot be ruled out. Next was an irregular or proxy war could easily escalate into limited conventional war. And for that, we need to be ready. I think I had only this much of time, sir. So I like to finish here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Tiwari. And one thing which he said very that
So you're muted.
when initiative is always with that person. As Kargil said,
General sir, kindly unmute. Sir, kindly unmute. You're still muted, sir. You're still muted.
Control to please unmute him. Oh, he's already unmuted. Commander Ghosh, you can speak.
Sumit, please continue.
Sir, good afternoon. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please.
Sir, very good afternoon to all the speakers and all the members in the group today for discussion. I'm just going to give you in a very short time a little naval perspective. I am a submariner and I was the first one to sail out from Mumbai. Mumbai to Kargil is 2,400 kilometers and we did not know what impact it will make. But then we had to sail out and the submarine went straight near Karachi. And before sailing out, the commander-in-chief had called me because I was a weapons officer on the sub, the commanding officer and the 2IC or the XO, and said that please have total control on the weapons. Otherwise, the war will go out of hand. Nevertheless, in the short time, Indian Navy placed a few subsurface assets, Kilo class and the SSK submarines near Karachi and off the Makran coast. The aim was to ensure sea denial and effect a kind of blockade to stop the sea lines of communication and stop the fuel supply and resources to Pakistan. Admiral Fasi Bukhari, who was the chief of the naval staff of the Pakistan Navy, himself was a submariner and he knew that the game is going to get over because the whole coast is now covered by the Indian Navy ships which were operating outside the ROA of F-16s and certain other missile-carrying helicopters. And the entire Eastern and Western fleet was brought under the guise of summer exercise in the Arabian Sea. And they were patrolling in the areas. The killer squadron, which comprised of many missile boats, was handling the ports of Okha and Saurashtra coast. Submarines had already blockaded the coast of the Makran coast and stopping the supply of oil and fuel from the Gulf, on which Pakistan was a lot dependent. So at one point of time, the naval chief had advised the Prime Minister that we are not going to, the Pakistan naval chief, I mean, had advised his own Prime Minister that we are not going to sustain long in case, and I'm not going to be in a position to send out the ships from Karachi harbor. And incidentally, I was on the submarine which was sitting outside the Karachi harbor, and it was very easy to just blockade the entire port by sinking one or two big ships, and the whole supply chain of the Pakistan would have stopped, because that is the main port from which their supply happens. So, and in the meantime, the Coast Guard had apprehended one North Korean ship, cargo ship carrying 177 tons of nuclear material for Pakistan. And this was done on 29 June 99, and it became a big international issue, and India raised it at the highest forum. And that became a tough thing for Pakistan to actually justify, because in the guise of sugar and other some supplies, it was also carrying the material for their Gauri missiles. The question often asked is, what did the Navy do in the Kargil? Because it's so far. You are 2,300 kilometers from Karachi, and what can you do? But the fact is that the blockade was so strong that Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif had confided that they had only 6 days of fuel left and resources left to fight the war. There was no way the fight could have gone further had they continued. And in case the Pakistani Navy had ventured to destroy any of or hit any of the Indian naval ships, there were 47 ships and 63 aircrafts which were patrolling the Bay of Bengal and submarines strategically placed. There was no way the Pakistan could go ahead with the war. And to our happiness, the Prime Minister of India, Atal Bihari Ji Vajpayee sir, had declared on 14th of July that the war was done, and the Operation Talwar, which was the code name given for the Indian Navy operation, had been a success story for the Indian Navy. So I am a proud participant of this Kargil, as many might wonder that what can you do? But I was perhaps closest to the Pakistani Karachi port, maybe, and many times from the periscope, I could see the soldiers sitting on the ships and lying in the sun, or perhaps patrolling their forecastle or the quarterdeck. And we had the firing solutions written and done. And if the orders were to engage, Pakistani Karachi port would have been blockaded very well. And this they knew. I think it's been a wonderful experience for me to participate in that war, and also some other operations which we undertake. And it is the subsurface second line of and the last line of defense which makes it so powerful that the strategic defense of the of any country depends on the last line of defense. And I think it gave an important edge to the military at that time, that the war could not be carried on further by Pakistan, and we were successful. I really salute the valor of the soldiers who really fought in those tough terrains, and I really support the Air Force and the Army men and the people behind the scenes, including, as Mr. Srinjoy reported. But it was a great opportunity for me to really be at the edge of the war itself, and being a participant as a submariner, I am proud about it. Thank you so much, sir.
Had our in failure or inaction of troops led to Kargil War? May I request General Joshi, in case if he is still here, can he respond to it?
Well, I'm here, sir. So I would say that it was a combination of both. While we were getting inputs, in the year 97, 98, the Pakistan Army was using extensive artillery to interdict National Highway 105 in the area of Kargil. And under that garb, they had, brought in a lot of artillery, and also a lot of infantry had been built up, but that was in the garb of taking it to Siachen, which was pretty active. So the inputs were coming, but then we were not able to synthesize it and analyze the way, this is going to develop into this Kargil kind of situation. So that is where it was an end failure. on the part of the troops that were deployed in that area, the threat perception was such that we were looking at infiltration of terrorists from this side through Zojila into the Kashmir Valley, and the patrolling was being done into the valley floor itself, and not on top of the mountain tops, like Toroling, 5140, 4875, these areas, which the Pak army had used to infiltrate along the ridge lines and occupy that. So it was a combination of both infill as well as the troops on the ground. And had we got this in the right time, probably, we would have taken action earlier and things would have been a little different. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for one very, very candid response. And I think we have learnt our lessons from there. There's a question for General KH. Sir, you mentioned at your location, tactical, during your presentation, that tactical war was won. However, strategic war was lost. Can you just elaborate this point?
Sir, when I said it was a tactical victory, but a strategic, deficiency of strategic, reactive or strategic thoughts, I meant the entire Kargil War itself. To begin with, the jointness issue, that is number one, jointness of services. Number two is the, 28 Mountain Division, which was de-inducted from Ladakh area earlier. Third is the intelligence failure, and also the decision-making issue aspect of entire Kargil War as such. That is the strategic, not weakness, strategic, I won't say even failure. It will be like lack of strategic culture. So that is what I meant, not specified to the areas north of Khardungla. Tactical victory was all over, right from, General Joshi also mentioned all these victories, right from Tololing to Tiger Hill to Sorbatla northwards. So strategic mention that I mentioned is not restricted to areas north of Khardungla. It was the entire war as such. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is a lesson which KRC also has very correctly brought out, and I think some work has been done. But to my mind, that work is still work in progress. Now there's a question for Air Marshal Tiwari. Did Air Force never plan high altitude warfare prior to Kargil? Can you just elaborate to it?
Yes, we always plan. We plan for all kind of warfare, let it be Kargil or anywhere in the sea or plains or desert or anything else. But there are few things which were peculiar to Kargil, which happens in every war that you learn along the war. Here, like the first imposition was that you cannot cross the LOC. So your attack direction was limited, for which you don't plan that the attack direction will be limited. You take it that you will be owning the sky at that time and you will be attacking the thing. The other issue was we in the hills, we also practice mostly breaking the supply lines or hitting the big enemy camp or the communication center. Here, the enemy was well dug in. He had all the time in the winters to settle. At no place the target was as big where you can spot from a distance and attack it. Now imagine traveling in an aircraft which travels about 1000 km/h, about more than 250 meters per second. You need to spot a target. You need to spot a target good about 2 minutes in advance for you to able to see that. And 2 minutes, you can calculate how far away you are. So those were the difficulties we learned with time. We carried out the steep diving attack, and within that much of time we could fulfill. Subsequently, in the subsequent, I think by end May or something, most of the army attacks or advances were preceded by the Air Force aircraft attacks. Thank you.
Thank you. From Air Marshal Tiwari's reply, and Joshi, what he mentioned in his presentation. One question for Joshi from my side. Prime Minister of India has put a restriction not to cross the LC, and yet we managed to close that supply to Pakistani troops. General Joshi, would you like to address this, that how it could be achieved?
So your voice got distorted in between. I couldn't get the question.
I repeat the question that one thing which was a restriction was put in Indian Armed Forces, that we will not cross the LC, and his supply lines were from that side. So how could we manage to block his supply lines? Because then only we could defeat him in the way we did. So would you like to address this issue?
The supply lines were basically interdicted by the Air Force, sir. So initially, I was a young CO at that time, a lieutenant colonel, in fact, newly promoted. And so therefore, my understanding of that time, sitting on top of 4875 or Tololing, you could see the aircraft, flying overhead, firing those flares to counter the Stinger missiles, etc. But later on, when I interacted with the Air Force, and of course, Air Marshal Amit will also further elaborate, that they were used to not so much close air support, which is not possible, which Air Marshal Amit also alluded to, but also interdict, basically to interdict the Pakistani camps which were behind, and the administrative areas which were behind, behind Gultari or on their side of the line of control, were very effectively used. And in some cases where it was possible, where we launched multi-directional attacks, let's say Tiger Hill, where 9 pair SF was used to go behind Tiger Hill and interdict the area of Paryoga Talab, which was the area from where the Pakistanis were bringing up the administrative echelons, and also the area of point 5140. Initially 1 Naga, 18 Garhwal were also used to go behind 5140. Again, on our side of the LC only, not crossing, but we were able to interdict their lines of communication in that manner. Thank you.
Now, may I request General Harsh Kakkad, our acting head of the strike, sum up today's things and over to Harsh.
Thank you, sir. The operations, the Kargil operations, have been extremely well defined by all the panelists, for which I must thank each and every one of them. We got perspectives which most of us were not aware of. And I don't think we could have got a better coverage, beginning from the geopolitical environment, coming down to unit operations, the involvement of the media, and then, of course, the other two services, their involvement, something which we really were not very clear about. At the end of it, looking at what has been spoken, I think there are some lessons as a nation we need to imbibe. Our belief that the Pakistanis would not occupy hill features which we vacated, taking lessons from history as it's been done over the years, I think was a miscalculation. We never learned. A similar incident occurred in Ladakh in 2020, where every year they would come for exercises and we tended to ignore that year, and that's when it happened. We cannot let this happen again and again. I think we've got to learn that as a nation, we cannot trust any of our neighbors to adhere to anything which has been happening over a period of time. Second, which was highlighted, is the failure of intelligence. It's happened again and again and again. Added to this is the importance of holding ground and the watershed. We cannot let that in any way be diluted. Then is the importance of all resources in one sector being under one commander, which is the raising of theatre commands. I agree, there are differences within the services, but a recent statement by the defense minister in Jammu, I think it was last week, and I'm just going to quote that statement. Drawing a lesson from the coordination seen between the Army, Air Force, and the Navy during the Kargil War, we have decided to set up joint theatre commands in the country. He did not elaborate. Was it positive? Was it negative? I guess it's left to us to presume. But the fact is that there were some lessons which we may not be aware of, which he hinted. At the end of the war, the army gained in standing in prestige. I think the nation learned to respect the soldier much more after the war than before it. The world understood the determination of India. We fought with multiple equipment shortcomings, displaying the importance of the man behind the gun, which is something which I think lessons which the world should have learned, and I think they've learned. The junior leadership of ours proved to be our strength, and I think it continues and will remain so. The induction of the Air Force into the war was the turning point. They were compelled to change tactics to meet terrain limitations, as the Air Marshal said, and they did so successfully. In addition, was the coordination between arms and services, which was either delivery of stores, unlimited firepower. I think it was an operation where at the ground level, the coordination was solid. The nation's respect for the Indian soldier grew manyfold. It would have been the right time had the army chief decided to strike and get what benefits we today continue to cry for. It was an occasion, but I guess we missed it like we missed 471. The nation's resolve and determination was globally protected. A government, then in minority, and a caretaker worked with all others to bring about national unity. I think it's very clear that India will unite whenever there is a crisis. However, despite realizing, as General Joshi said, that we must possess hard military power, until we do so, we will never be able to deter our adversaries. For this, we need realistic budgets and joint capability development. We fell to Pakistan's nuclear blackmail in 1999. It took us almost 20 years to call Pakistan's nuclear bluff with Balakot. A lot would have changed had we done it then. The global environment in 1999 was also not in our favor. We were in the Russian camp. We had just tested the nuclear device a year ago, and Bill Clinton believed Kashmir to be a nuclear flashpoint, and hence pushed talks in favor of Pakistan, which was then the darling of the West. The end result of the war, Pakistan suffered immensely. It lost prestige once the truth of its involvement came out. The army lost its standing, but managed to shift the blame to the political leadership. In fact, Pakistan's story is a classic example of turning defeat in Kargil to a victory with Musharraf taking over the country. In conclusion, on behalf of the chairman and all members of STRIVE, I'd like to thank our speakers for sparing their time and sharing their views with us. It was, for me at least, an absolute learning experience. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was a wonderful short, but very, very incisive and thought-provoking conclusion. And I'm sure we will continue deliberating on it. Gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the webinar. I hope you enjoyed our efforts as much as we enjoyed presenting the glorious chapter of the Indian military history. Hasya Manana, till we meet again, as Abbas said, to share another glorious chapter of Indian military history, and best wishes to each one of you.